Hi everyone, welcome to Omega Male. All right, I'm Taylor. I am an intern here with WeDeepen. I work with their marketing. I'm a recent graduate, and I just want to first start off with a little disclaimer. This is a topic that may be a little sensitive to some, and we may hear some words that are either abrupt or we have not heard before in a little bit. So this is a very calming space. Everyone's open and welcome to talk about it. So just hang in there if that comes up. Our expectations for tonight, we will be about 90 minutes, ending at about 8:30 Pacific Standard Time, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. If you'd like to tag your IG name, just like we all have done here, you're just gonna click the little 3 red dots or white dots in the corner, and you can switch it to your little IG name in there. You are being recorded, and I want to let you know that it's gonna be up on our Facebook channel at WeDeepen and also on our YouTube channel as well. So you can always check it out and see how the after show and all that was. And we're gonna have an after party. It's gonna be at Topia. We're gonna drop the link in right now. We're gonna drop it in right at the end of the night. So if you guys have any comments or questions about everything that's happened so far, we're gonna be discussing all that after, and we can all meet after and have a little party. I want to introduce our guide for tonight for Omega Male. He's also the person who composed the music that you just listened to if you liked that. His name is Dan Mackenzie. He is a podcast host, a writer, and a personal counselor whose work is rooted in anthropology and nonviolent communication. Dan's known in Los Angeles area for stimulating the vital conversation at social gatherings and clubs, where he also performs as an Emmy-nominated singer and songwriter. Later this month, Dan will be launching another Amigo Male podcast as he continues to work on his book by the same title. So let's introduce him and let's get started.
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you all, WeDeepen people. Indeed, I am working on the Omega Male book. And so I'm particularly grateful for this opportunity because this Omega Male series kind of provides me with a dual purpose, a dual opportunity. On the one hand, I'm having the opportunity to kind of road test the ideas that I'm working on for the book and sort of see how they resonate and find what the best way to express them is. And also at the same time, thereby stimulate those vital conversations that you mentioned, or at least conversations that I find interesting. So I'm really deeply appreciative of everyone who showed up here, our special guests, all of you participants that are basically facilitating that process for me by joining in. And after I've sort of done my presentational aspect this evening, there will be plenty of opportunity for you guys to weigh in, to challenge the ideas that I present, to support them, to add something to them, whatever flows. I guess all that we're asking in the format of this is that you try to stick to what we're calling the, what do we call them? The rules of engagement. I think we even have a little card for that. If you want to throw that up there. Our guidelines are be cool, be kind, and be bold. And so, oh, there we go. There they are. Pretty self-explanatory. Be cool just basically means we are giving you the opportunity to unmute yourself when it's time to speak. Just please wait for the appropriate time. Try not to interrupt anyone, talk over anyone, be mindful of how long you're speaking for, maybe how often you've contributed if somebody else wants to get in a word. And that's basically it. Be kind, straightforward also. Feel free to be as passionate as you want about sharing your opinion or even challenging mine or somebody else's. Just try not to insult or, attack anybody. That's not kind. We don't like that. We like kindness. And so lastly, be bold. Generally speaking, that just is kind of an encouragement to share whatever you feel compelled to share in this space. I know that it can be a little daunting to share stuff on a Zoom call, particularly one that's, in this kind of format. But I want to speak to that with regard to our specific topic tonight, because talking about sex and porn is very charged for people. And one of our guest speakers pointed out to me in our little powwow beforehand, what's really valuable here, I think, and what we're going for is to create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing and talking about this topic in a way that they normally don't, like openly, kind of shamelessly, And so I think all we can do is maybe try to lead by example in that regard. And that's really it. I just want to, and if you're having trouble getting a word in, drop a note into the chat. Taylor will be monitoring that, and we'll figure out a way to fit you in some way or another. So that's pretty much for the intro stuff. Before I jump into the content, I guess this is sort of a chance to check in, get a feel for the temperature in the Zoom room. Would anybody like to just share a brief sentence about what attracted them to this? I can sort of call on you, or if anyone wants to unmute and say, I'm interested in this topic for blah, 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 but just a real quick shot. Anybody? Walter, how about you? What brings you here for this? Why do you think this is a vital topic? No, he didn't want to say. All right. You know what? I don't want to put anyone on the hot seat. In fact, this one time, because it's pornography, I'm just going to move on to the content because I don't want to create a pressured situation here. But it's indicative, of what our topic is. I'm feeling the charge of it, and I'm therefore feeling very excited about it. So I'm just going to jump in. Let's talk about porn. I guess I have a disclaimer too, in that it's so vast a topic. We're not going to cover all of it. We're not going to cover all the angles. And even for me, it's been a challenge thinking about how to approach this. What's my way in here? I was originally planning to just sort of tell the story of my own connection to or involvement with porn, starting from when I got my hands on my first, penthouse when I was 12. And I thought that would be kind of titillating, but I don't want to take up too much time and take too much time away from the sort of philosophical stuff. So I'll just say this. My relationship to porn is a lot like my relationship to cannabis, in that I got into it way back in the day, early on, before it was socially very widespread and accepted. And you had to go to some questionable places to get your hands on it. And it wasn't always available in a very wide array of varieties. And nowadays, it's everywhere. Everyone's doing it. It's custom tailored to your specific needs and likings, and I'm not into it anymore. So, and that goes for pot and porn. But that doesn't, I'm coming at this from an anti-porn point of view, not at all. And I hope it'll be obvious that I'm very sex positive. But it's a loaded topic. So my focus, I guess in my way in, is the omega male concept. To me, the omega male concept basically is about envisioning and striving for a more evolved conscious ideal for men specifically. And so that's the context in which I'd like to talk about porn. And the inspiration for omega male and that whole concept came from my conviction that we're not just animals. It may seem sort of an obvious thing to say, but I don't think of the human being as just a more evolved animal. We undoubtedly share a kind of biological element with animals. You could even call it our animal instinct and such. But we have a freedom that distinguishes us from animals. And I'm not talking about sort of political freedom from tyranny or freedom to do this or that, but an inner freedom, meaning we have at least the capacity to overcome that which would make us unfree, including our biological animal instincts, our inherited social forms and patterns, even our personal trauma from our past. These are all things that we have the capacity to kind of evolve beyond and transcend in a way. I don't think it's an easy path, but that path of conscious self-evolution is something that I'm more interested than anything in the world, because I think it also serves our collective evolution, the more people that embark upon that. And but in that sort of quest for self-mastery, self-evolution, self-elevation, whatever you want to call it, we can't just repress the animal instinct. We can't just run from our shadows. We can't just sort of intellectually disavow our inherited social patterns and programming. We have to actually really grapple with these things. We have to dive into the pool, the murkiness of it all, and swim around in it. We have to take a leap of faith into our own inner darkness. And I think this is something that is common to a lot of sort of initiation-based spiritual traditions. This notion that the individual is tasked with facing their deepest fear, their doubts, our longing, our rage, our desire, our feelings of isolation, and taking a real deep self-confrontational dive. And I would say that in dealing with our sexuality, this may be one of the sort of most complex, challenging, and mysterious aspects of that endeavor. And it's because, for one thing, it encompasses a lot of those above mentioned challenges in and of itself, dealing with fear and doubt and longing and isolation and desire, but it also taps into that animal element. It's rooted to some degree in our biological urges. It also swims around in our sort of dark, shadowy subconscious. And at the same time, it offers our sexuality, that is, offers the possibility and the promise even of the most sublime form of connection between human beings, of the shared expression of love, of profound intimacy, of kind of wordless communication, of seeing and understanding and being known by someone, even ecstasy. So that's kind of a big chunk to bite off. And I would say that our culture has failed to integrate those aspects. Compared to, for example, the pagan culture, right? Modern Western culture has really had a hard time integrating the dark with the light in sexuality, the animal with the elevated, the known with the unknown. And that's caused some problems. I mean, what it's done is it's sort of bifurcated, it's split into two, how we view sexuality. And I would say the one is the acceptable and the other is the taboo. And the acceptable has become kind of steam cleaned, sanitized, romanticized, and in some cases bastardized into sort of a marketing tool. And if we think about our social contracts, the acceptable form of sexuality until very recent history basically meant vaginal intercourse between a married man and a woman. All right, that's a slight exaggeration. The needle has moved a little bit since then, but very slowly, you'll admit, right? I mean, it was not that long ago. I personally was in college in the great state of Rhode Island. And when I was in college, there was actually a law on the books in the state of Rhode Island against sodomy. Now, sodomy was defined not just as anal sex, but as oral sex, even oral sex between a man and a woman. Shocking, oral sex between a married man and a woman, all against the law in Rhode Island. And I have to tell you, I did gleefully defy that law on many occasions, but it is very telling, I think, in our culture and about our culture that not just Rhode Island, but many, many states had anti-sodomy laws just like that, forbidding all of those practices that many of us consider just mundane things that happen between consenting adults. And those stayed on the books until 2003, by the way. So it's kind of it's undeniable that we live in a post-Puritan repressed society. And to me, it's somewhat ironic that there are other sort of religious cultures in the world that look at us as very depraved and sexualized. But I would say that that's the surface sheen of our American culture. In reality, we are still, I would say, plagued with a profound shame about sex. It's very difficult for us to talk about sex. Men are uncomfortable talking about sex with one another, except for, did you get laid? Men and women have a hard time talking about sex. Even people in couples, intimate couples that have been together for a long time, are challenged to really share openly and intimately their sexual needs and desires and wants and fantasies. And so that has created kind of a real imbalance in our culture. We also have like pretty much non-existent or certainly woefully inadequate sex education for younger people. And that's not just academic education. I'm talking about parenting. I'm talking about mentoring of children. We don't really have an integrated way to prepare people for their sort of sexual awakening. And because of that, anybody who feels, and this is pretty much everybody, anyone who feels compelled or lacking or a desire to explore the kind of darker, mysterious, horny, kinky, that taboo side of sexuality has to go to porn to do it, right? We don't really have another outlet, and it's universally and easily accessible. And so I don't think that's all bad. In fact, I want to sort of begin this first segment here talking about what I would qualify as good, things that are good about porn. So for me, that really begins with, think of the affirmation that some people have. Basically, anybody who's not of a heteronormative disposition, and particularly who lives in a repressive, typical American community, imagine the validation and the affirmation and the sort of liberation that a person like that might experience to just be able to go online and see thousands of people having sex and want to, bless you, want to have sex or do have sex. That's a huge thing among people that are generally still ostracized in our society. So I think of particularly young LGBTQ people and how affirming that is. At the same time, I would say that there's a similarly huge potential for the so-called heteronormal, straight crowd in pornography. And what I mean by that is anybody who has any level of curiosity or any adventurousness. I think it just sort of has to do with the nature of how porn is generally presented in this grand buffet of endless options, menu options of very specific proclivities and whatnot. And so anyone who's got any curiosity and gets into porn a little bit will find in their little exploration of whatever alleyways and byroads that they happen upon, they will soon discover, if there's self-awareness, that they have kind of a, let's call it an involuntary biological response system that may actually get turned on by let's say a broader array of scenarios than they would normally want to admit to themselves or to their social group, right? And so there's a kind of an element of self-discovery there for everyone. And this realization that sexuality, no matter what your kind of, official designation is, you're straight, you're gay, whatever, sexuality is for every single person a profoundly personal, nuanced, mysterious, sometimes surprising, sometimes confusing process and experience. And that, if integrated, truly is a very empowering thing, because it frees us from shame, personal shame, familial shame, inherited shame. And in terms of social benefit, it actually helps us naturally develop attitudes, cultural, social attitudes that are welcoming and accepting of people from all stripes and all parts of the rainbow and all sexual and gender identifications. That's one really great thing about pornography. And I think that can't be underemphasized. And hopefully that eventually leads people, if they're properly supported, into having more open conversation. So that's not the end of my spiel, but I want to sort of do a little mini intermission here and invite anybody at this point who might feel compelled to add something that they think is good about porn, or just thoughts that are positive along those lines, or along something I haven't mentioned. Does anyone want to chime in? Take your time, unmute yourself, feel free.
Well, that was a lot. I feel like I get what you're saying by all that. And for me, being someone who is more of like the younger generation, like I didn't even know what Penthouse was. Is that like a form of Playboy? That's like what I grew up with. And like we didn't even have like magazines or anything. We kind of just grew up straight with like Pornhub being like one of like the multi-billion-dollar industries of where you can watch it and stuff. And when I first got into it, it was definitely kind of scary. I was freaked out a little bit, but as I've tried doing it with partners and stuff, I feel like it could be an intimate thing if it's something that you kind of both talk about in a way. But I can see how it can also go off the line a little bit, is being like awkward or something scary, because that's something that a man would like to do more in like his personal time as well. So I'm trying to like figure out the little differences between those and like find like a barrier if that is something.
I love hearing that. I love hearing that, particularly from, it's sort of a generational perspective. And there are different generations clearly represented here. So I'm sure that's like even for me, I mean, how many generations am I ahead of you? One, oh, I hope just one, maybe. I don't even know how to qualify that. Maybe two. I'm Gen X. So that's the thing. Yeah, some couples do apparently really benefit from looking at porn together. I think it neutralizes what might be some of the more negative aspects of porn when a couple's looking at it together. So that's something to maybe explore a little bit later on. Um, and here's another thing that I can come up with. I have to tell you, even though I said I've largely sworn it off, I did have a little bit of a resurgence when I was in the fertility process. And I have to tell you, when you are in a fluorescent lit cinder block bathroom of a fertility clinic, and your job is to deliver a sperm sample in 10 or 15 minutes, porn comes in really handy. So there's another good thing about it. But I want to kind of venture into where I left off. This sort of the conscious, sort of self-evolving person's quest to integrate all their elements and be self-aware and explore those things, and the possibility that porn affords for that. Unfortunately, it doesn't always go that way. And so I would say that for some people, maybe someone who's not as spiritually self-aware or prepared to kind of go inward in that self-examining way, or someone who lives in, frankly, a much more sex negative, is that a term? I hope I just coined a term. It's a sex negative community. That person, when encountering sort of like the myriad manifestations of their own sexuality as they get into porn and maybe get deeper and deeper into it, because there is, I think, for some people, a tendency to a need to go more and more intense to experience the same level of excitement. For that kind of person, that process can lead to a self-loathing, sort of the opposite direction, where instead of a release of shame, there's an increase of shame and a confusion and depression. And there's plenty of information on the internet that you can Google, so I don't need to summarize it, but that links, the psychological effects of porn addiction, related to erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation and dissatisfaction with normal sex, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that the darkest manifestation in that in some people is a kind of self-loathing that expresses itself outward. And for those of you who were here for the last Omega Male, the first session we had, I was talking about the manosphere, this realm of the internet that's populated by mostly sort of far right young men who are very homophobic and anti-feminist and sexist and misogynist. And I think those things are kind of linked, and that's worth exploring. But that's not just because I think that there are some communities that are more conservative and other communities that are liberal and supportive and sex positive. I actually think that it is because porn itself is actually not designed, surprise, surprise, to heal people's shame and to shed a beautiful, light of illumination on the entire spectrum of sexuality and all of its nuances and the potential for human connection and elevated, glorious communication. I think it's not what porn is generally for, right? Porn generally is there and is designed to kind of stimulate the more animalistic, our basest desires, right? It's crafted by people that are trying to do something very specific that's not particularly elevated in that regard. So it's kind of one-sided. Beyond that, it's not real sex. And this is something I've heard Cindy, one of our guests, talk about. This is, we're not talking about real people having an organic experience that's unfolding naturally between them in a sort of improvisatory, mutually sensitive way. It's generally people who are performing for a camera, and they're performing a script. And the script is, aside from not generally being Shakespearean in caliber, tends to feature women, if we're talking about not all porn, but a vast segment of it, women in subservient and even servile positions. There's a sort of highly sexist programming, and it's very much geared towards what is perceived to be men's desires. there's no foreplay or flirtation or, mutual sensitivity or sense of what would arouse a woman. This, to be crude, this is generally the script is, girl blows guy, fucks girl on her back, flips her over, fucks her doggy style, fucks her in the ass, and then comes on her face or her tits. And I apologize to those of you, we didn't warn you about the language, but I'm intentionally using the language of the genre because I think that there's also the possibility, at least, that the kind of objectifying portrayal of sex leads to a kind of objectifying thinking and even an objectifying language. And so it's no surprise that men to this day still say things like, hey, did you get some pussy? Instead of, hey, did you make any interesting connections with any compelling women at the party last night? Whatever a healthy person might say. So I think those things are connected. And no matter how enlightened you are, I think if you're feeding yourself, your psyche, a diet of largely sort of sexist and even misogynist sexual fare, it's ultimately going to affect your expectations of sex and your even your behavior in sex. And if this isn't true for grown men, imagine what it's like for young men, particularly who may have had zero or just little sexual experience. And if they're taking in this kind of material, how that's going to affect their sexual functioning. I think there's probably a lot of material that's already been published around this, but it's worth considering. I think that, I guess I could go a little bit further into that, but I'll leave that for further discussion. I think also the sort of menu style aspect of sex can go another way too. I said this can, in a way, empower people to kind of explore and in an enlightening way, but it also can lead to a kind of fetishism. This is something that I've pondered quite a bit. An example of what I'm talking about would be, let's say, Joey is talking with his friends at school about big tits, girls with big boobs, right? And he gets real excited about that. This seems to be a thing. And so he goes home to jerk off to porn. And by the way, if it sounds like I'm being insensitive, I've heard from friends who are educators who are telling me about kids being exposed to porn at incredibly young ages. We're not just talking about 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds. We're talking about, a friend of mine was sharing an anecdote with me how one of her parents at her school was horrified because her 4-year-old was being shown porn by a 9-year-old. So these are kids that are really being exposed at a young age. So this kid goes home and he starts getting into big boobs, and all he can jerk off to is big boobs and bigger boobs because there's this increased need for intensity. And by the time he actually meets somebody, a young woman at his school, a girl that he might be romantically interested in, he's either not interested because she doesn't have huge boobs, or he's interested in her, but he can't sexually function when it's time to discover that part of themselves. So I think these are things that are happening to some kids. And maybe one more thing that I'll mention before opening up the conversation again is just the phenomenon of having intense visual stimulation as part of your primary sexual experience. I think there must be something about staring at a very bright screen and watching umpteen sexual acts just to get yourself to one orgasm, when then you find yourself in a real situation with a person trying to have sort of normal human sex. It might affect your disposition in a particular way, and one that's detrimental to real connection. But the one thing that I haven't really touched upon, because I kind of am reserving it for more public conversation, is how pornography might affect someone, particularly a man, in relationship, right? We've talked about like how can it affect your sexual health directly, but so I'm sort of going to give you a dual scenario. On the one hand, if a guy's in a relationship and his partner only is interested in sex once or twice a week, but he's horny 5 or 6 times a week, what's against him masturbating to pornography in privacy, especially if he's exploring something that's not particularly satisfied in the relationship or different types of people? What's against that? Would it not be an impingement on his personal freedom to want to limit him in that way? Is it really cheating to be thinking about somebody else or seeing the image of someone else? On the other hand, let's say the same person is in the relationship and is so into porn that they're not showing up even for the 1 or 2 times of sex, or they seem distracted, or he's his partner feels like he's in another world because he's always going to some sort of replaying of the porn in his head in order to get himself there, or he's wasted too much of energy on porn and he's not interested, or he's becoming disinterested in normal sex. These are all sort of things that I think people are dealing with on some level. So I want to open up the conversation again. That sort of concludes some of my basic thoughts. How do you people feel about this? What's your experience? If you're, maybe women want to share what they feel about the effects of porn on their relationships are, the people that they're with. Speak, share. Tell me what you think. Or do you have a personal experience of how porn has affected your relationship? This is a lot to ask, I'm realizing. And so nobody's on the spot here, but I think it's culturally really healthy to bring ourselves to share in this way and to have these conversations, you know? So I encourage it.
This is more of a statement of thought, but I'm just curious if there are studies showing correlations between kids who are becoming more and more exposed to social media, especially Instagram, especially TikTok, where, you know, things are becoming a lot more uncensored, and what their, you know, what the effects are from that. I would imagine there's some pretty serious consequences that are much more probably, you know, instant compared to the 90s or the 80s, where a magazine is totally different from having a phone in bed, right? So it seems like I would imagine that there's a much easier access to this technology that probably is affecting kids, not even just kids, I think everyone across the board. But I don't know if you're familiar with that, if you're savvy in that area, but just something I wanted to throw out there.
That's interesting. Are you Ryan, are you basically saying that there's some sort of pornographic content being shared on TikTok? I wasn't even aware of that. So wow, that's pretty surprising, because that's everybody's, right? We've got like 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds on TikTok doing little innocent dances. I don't know any stats about that. I think TikTok is very relatively new. And I also know, I have heard that there is, TikTok is kind of, there's legal controversy over it, maybe including for that reason. I don't know if they're trying to regulate it, but that's a really good, interesting point. Although I did see that Mark was raising his hand and might have something to say to the point of the sort of relationship issue of porn. Mark, did you have something to share?
Sure, am I muted?
Nope, I think you're on.
Yeah, no, just to help you get the conversation started, Dan, I think, you know, and what I'm gonna do is actually, I'm gonna set a timer for myself for 3 minutes. So when that goes off, kind of without regard for where I am, I'll share the time. You know, I appreciated hearing everything that you were saying, Dan, and I think that I tend to be a bit of a, probably a bit of an alarmist, and probably very, kind of troubled, you know, by porn. So my personal history, like yours, Gen X, you know, started with magazines. I mean, I remember literally the kid down the street would steal them from his dad, like found them in his dad's closet, and then like would stash them in like the neighborhood clubhouse. So sort of like, you know, internet porn for me didn't become a thing until, frankly, well out of college and probably, you know, into being married. And ultimately, you know, ultimately the place that I landed around pornography and where I land now is that it's not something that I use, and it's not something that I think is particularly healthy for men, right? So you said a whole lot in the interest of time. It's not something that I never ever have used in the last several years, but like virtually never. And I say that I think of porn in terms of the same way that I think about sobriety, right? So like I happen to be sober and I don't even take a sip of beer. I can't say I don't even take a sip of pornography. I've seen, you know, a naked picture, you know, in the past several years. But for a solid 6+ years, I have not used pornography at all regularly, or even really irregularly. And for me, the quality of thought and capacity for the way in which I think about women, I think is a lot healthier. And for me, additionally, having a 16-year-old son, I can be, you know, I've told him, you know, I've had conversations with him, and I mean, I discussed it with his mother, and then we decided I'd be the one to talk to him. And I said, look, I don't want you can do whatever you want, right? But I don't want you using pornography. I don't want you using pornography on your phone. I don't want you looking at pornography in your room. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's healthy. Here are the reasons why. We can talk about it. It's out there. But and I was able, and I wanted to be able to look at him and say what I said, which is I don't use it. I have in the past, and it wasn't good for me. I think I always have these conversations with my teenage son when I'm driving, so that he can't. I mean, he probably would like to throw himself out of the moving vehicle, but that's so risky that he's stuck listening to me, because anywhere else, he would run, and I wouldn't blame him. But so some of what you're saying, Dan, got me thinking. I think of pornography a little bit the way that I think of drugs. And when I say drugs, I mean like porn to me is like drugs in the sense that there's marijuana, there's heroin, there's crack, there's crystal meth, there's speedballs, and there's like LSD and there's mushrooms. That's a pretty wide range of things, right? And I think that one of the things that I've kind of observed as an adult who has seen pornography on the internet is like, you may want to go get weed and you may end up like smoking crack. And the difference there being simply like, you may want to look at big boobs, and then you may see a woman who's getting slapped in the face, and spit on, but she has big boobs. And it's, those two videos are side by side. And that to me, makes the wide world of porn a little bit dangerous. And I think that it relies on the user to really curate. And, I don't want my son out there doing that. And I don't really want to be, engaging regularly in an environment where those are, and look, maybe slapping and spitting is people are definitely into that. Like, that's not my thing. And the other way that I'll compare it to drugs is that like some people can recreationally use crack and heroin and they're fine. And some folks can recreationally use it. And some folks probably, are living in the drug trafficking world, ethically and responsibly. I tend to think that there's surely ethical and responsible people in the world of pornography. There's probably a lot of people getting hurt in that environment as well. And there's probably a lot of things that are unhealthy. That doesn't mean that there's not healthy sex workers. Absolutely there are. And I'm not moralizing about them. I'm just making a choice for myself, my integrity, and the way that I want to raise my son as to what I want to stay away from and what I don't want to let into my consciousness with my romantic partners, and what I'd love to inspire him to stay away from. So with that, I'll share the time.
I really appreciate that, Mark. And yeah, when somebody really is going to share in such a vulnerable, generous way, I'm going to sort of let the clock roll out. Unless it gets really extreme. And I felt that was all very valuable, Mark, and I really appreciate that you're sharing in that way and sort of leading by example. That is a point for me too. We don't know, in this day and age, there are a lot of free, happy sex workers, but there are people being exploited, as you say. There are people that are operating under some form of duress or drug addiction. And the problem is, for me, how do we tell who's being exploited and who isn't? And kind of what's our karmic connection to that? In a way, if I'm getting off on something that was created by someone under duress or someone who's being exploited. And as you mentioned, there's stuff in there that's just maybe wouldn't be healthy material. There are sexist tropes, yes, and there's even racist tropes in a lot of pornography. And so you're getting a lot of stuff mixed in because, as I said, it's not designed as a beautiful educational tool. Does anyone else want to kind of speak to that question before I introduce our first guest speaker?
So it was interesting that you're talking about that, because yes, the porn industry, we don't really know like who's being treated right in that, but now we're kind of moving on to the like my generation, as I said, where there's platforms like TikTok where there's a lot of like inappropriate dancing that kind of exposes like sexuality in a way, which with the whole like women and body empowerment thing, it can be great. But then we also have like OnlyFans, which is like the new form of porn, but for like generation my age, where people and members are subscribing to young adults like from 18 to how old, and they're allowed to post whatever they want on there, and they're not even attached to like a porn site. So in that way they are being safer, but they're also like putting themselves out there, and they may not quite understand like what they're doing yet in doing so.
Yeah, both good points, right? There's protection for some people, but to what degree is that behavior of posting that stuff informed by having grown up in the Pornhub era, right? That you grew up in your generation. This is kind of a good point maybe to introduce Karl. Karl's going to be one of our guest speakers, and he, on the subject of that Mark kind of brought up, what does it mean to kind of abstain from pornography? What would it do to our health to actually just not try to parse it and see what's healthy and what's not healthy, but to just sort of like as one solution explore not using it. So Karl is a men's transformational and leadership coach. He works with men to help them transform into trustworthy, powerful, heart-driven leaders. And Karl has actually just finished coaching a group of men in a kind of sexual self-mastery course, which involved a 21-day no porn and no masturbation challenge. Karl, I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about that and about your work along those lines in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Daniel. So for me, what really came up in what you spoke to was around the disconnection piece. How porn can lead to disconnection with our partners, but it can also lead to disconnection with ourselves. And that is something which is the reason why these such 21-day challenges exist. And this disconnection comes from the fact that porn really leads us into our minds. You know, in general, we live in a society right now where a lot of men especially, but men and women are in our minds, and we're getting more and more cut off from our bodies, from our emotions, from our feelings of the moment. And porn just exacerbates that. It's something where, you know, we as men, we sit, we stare at a screen, usually possibly to relieve stress, to numb out our emotions, to fall asleep. And we're looking at a screen and we're just processing pictures, accessing the visual cortex, and maybe doing a jackhammer quick technique, experiencing a little bit of pleasure and getting on with it. That is completely removing and disconnecting us from experiencing our sexuality within ourselves. And then that leads to removing us from experiencing sexuality with our partners. Biologically, our sexuality is a very embodied practice. It is feeling ourselves, feeling our emotions in the moment, feeling the feeling of the moment. It is moving the energy within our body and allowing us to feel the different pleasure on the spectrum of pleasure that we can. When we allow ourselves to drop into our bodies, and this is something which a lot of the men in the sexual self-mastery course experienced, is the feeling of sex and masturbation has a whole different definition to it. It can be something you feel in your cock area. It can be something you feel throughout your body. It can be something which you feel emotions coming out. It can be something where you move energy and you actually feel the orgasm in your chest, in your legs, in your back. And there's so many colors and flavors to sexuality, but we numb all of that out by looking at porn. And a lot of the men in the course that I coached experienced sex in a whole different way, pleasure in a whole different way. They experienced themselves and their emotions in a whole different way. And that came from getting out of the mind, like you mentioned, with the 21-day challenge, cutting off porn, getting out of their mind and feeling the felt sense of the sexuality, feeling it through the senses. And that allows you to then not only feel the expansion of the pleasure, but allows you to control the orgasm. Many men who get into this type of work do so because of erectile dysfunction, because of premature ejaculation. And when you're able to drop into your body and get out of your mind, you're able to control that ejaculation. You're able to potentially last longer, choose when you ejaculate, even have non-ejaculatory orgasms, multiple non-ejaculatory orgasms, and full body orgasms where you experience in different ways. So we deprive ourselves of that by making it such a mental exercise, and porn really, really encourages it to be a mental exercise. And another thing, you know, I spoke a little bit about the disconnection with ourselves, but the disconnection it creates with our partners is just tremendous. A lot of the women I have talked to and the partners of some of the men who have done this work have provided feedback that the biggest thing a lot of women are missing from their men in the bedroom, you know, we have this ideal, Daniel, you talk about, you know, what the expectations are of a man, you know, your muscles, the size of your cock, all of that. But what I've heard in having depth conversations with a lot of women is the biggest thing that they are desiring is a man's presence and his embodied presence in the moment. And what so many men who are used to watching porn, quickly ejaculating in a very dull, flavorful way is these women don't really feel his presence in the room because he's constantly in his head thinking, am I doing this right? Am I lasting long enough? Does this look right? And then maybe he even has to visualize certain things to get erect because of some of the fetishes which he has in porn, which doesn't allow the simple connection with the woman to allow him to get erect. So a lot of women desire your presence, man. They desire for you to be in your body, your felt body, your feelings, and your ability to move energy within yourself, the ability for you to feel your pleasure in a way that you otherwise normally don't feel it, and share that energy with her. Many of the men in my group, they experienced reconnections, not only sexually, but even in the relationship due to doing this work. And this work being getting into their body and allowing their senses to get them erect as opposed to visualization. And many of these relationships, marriages, brought that connection due to the man just allowing himself to feel deeper and feel the experience deeper. So really, porn, I think, I'm not anti-porn. I think there's a time and a place. I think there's certain benefits, but I think if used consciously, if used intentionally, anything used consciously and intentionally is okay. But when we get lured into it, when it becomes, we recalibrate sexuality to be this visual, dull way of being, that I think is what's causing the most harm to our sexuality as men and for our women who we want to have a beautiful, rich, deep experience with.
Yeah, thank you, Karl. That's man, there's a lot of great wisdom there. And I'm just grateful that there are people like you that are working with men in this way. You're sort of, healing one of the ailments of our time with this work. And some of the things you said really resonated with me, particularly what you were saying about presence, right? I think that's true. And it speaks to the piece about that I was bringing up about visual overstimulation. If your entire training, your sexual self-training is this massive download of visual stimuli, then you can't even be present because you want to be present, but your body's not functioning and cooperating because you're used to this visual mental stuff going on. And that's problematic, obviously. And so the question is, like, does that mean that there's something wrong with eroticism? I don't think so. I think part of what's missing in pornography, maybe what might make it healthier. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who really wanted to be on the call, but she lives in Europe, so unfortunately she can't share. But we were talking about she's got a lot more exposure to and knowledge about different forms of eroticism, erotic literature, even erotic books on tape, where you're listening to erotic literature. And this is not like, I think we immediately go to just dumb romance novels or something. This is like a highly intelligent, educated person I'm talking about. So I doubt that she's taking in some crappy stuff. But there are forms of erotic material out there that, if they were sort of more appealing and readily available, or maybe part of our culture, I think might foster a more, like, a healthier eroticism. I think part of what's problematic, I hate to use that term, it's so PC, like, what's problematic about porn, but I don't know how else to say it, is that not only is it just this onslaught of the sort of money shots, right? There's not a lot of buildup and nuance in it. And because of that, I think porn addiction can lead to kind of a sex addiction for many people, because there really isn't, porn isn't portrayed in this sort of mystical, fantastical way that a lot of erotica is. I think you can sort of, in your self-exploration through porn, like you said, kind of, in a conscious way, maybe you pick up some tricks and some ideas and things to explore. But when you have an experience of your erotic consciousness and a sort of deep exploration of that sort of the darkness, the mystery of sex in an erotic way rather than a pornographic way, I think it's easier to distinguish fantasy from real life. I think there's a confusion that happens because the sex is so down and dirty and raw and unadulterated in porn that people start feeling, who are really fetishizing or really getting addicted to it, that they have to then go do the things that are getting them off in porn in real life. And that's where it crosses over to sex addiction. Whereas I think if you have a healthy, I don't mind saying a healthy sense of eroticism, then you understand that on the one hand, you don't have to limit your fantasy life to things that you would do in real life, right? You have a permission to move beyond those things in your erotic self-exploration. And at the same time, you don't have to do everything in real life that you fantasize about. There's sort of these worlds that are kind of overlapping and intersecting, but they're more distinct, I think, with a healthy sense of eroticism versus not. But you know, does anyone else want to say anything about any of that stuff? By the way, I don't want to move along because I may soon. That would be a good opportunity to introduce our next guest, but I'd like to open up the conversation. Has anything arisen out of what Karl was sharing about this work, or anything more about the effect of pornography in couples? Or does anyone want to go back to mentioning something about how they've used pornography in a positive way? I don't want to shut down that part of the conversation. We're not anti-porn, but we're really taking a kind of a critical look at it.
I have more thoughts, Dan, but I'm not going to go till some other folks speak because I've already spoken. So when other folks have spoken, I'll share.
I'm hearing crickets, so unless someone wants to jump in, I would say to have a bash at it. Does anyone else out there that's about to speak?
Yeah, I'll jump in. My name's Ryan. I really, really appreciate this group and this conversation. It's a conversation that should be had all over. What it reminds me of is like sex education in school, and how many people resist sex education in school. There should be this porn education in school. And you know, Daniel, as you mentioned, sex negative cultures. You know, parents unwilling to speak to their children about sex are now unwilling to speak to their kids about porn. It's turning a blind eye to this thing that, as you mentioned, 4-year-olds are being introduced to, and the conversation isn't being had. So I really appreciate this space. Something else that came up for me, and Karl, you were speaking to it, is about, you know, a man's sexual relationship to himself. You know, I know so many men and have experienced so many men who their goal is to go out and get pussy and get laid. And they're just going out there in pods to try to talk to women and woo women to get in their pants, not necessarily just for the sexual pleasure, but for the idea of conquering, or the idea that that's what makes them a man. That if you're at home and you're only masturbating, it means you're a loner, and it means you're not important, and it means you're not strong, and it means you're not a man. Instead of having a deep felt sense, healthy, loving relationship to masturbation, where it's beautiful, it's okay, and it's powerful, and you can choose to have sex with a woman if you want to, but sex with a woman doesn't define your masculinity and your power and your presence. And I think porn also just contributes to that as well in many ways. And so overall, just really pleased with this group and really thankful for the conversation, and want to contribute to it being spread more and more and being socially acceptable to talk about, because it's real. Similar to like drugs becoming more apparent, heroin addiction becoming more apparent, people talking about it more. We really want the same for porn and sexuality. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful, and it's deep. Particularly the piece that you offered about you know, sex education. I've been really pondering why there isn't, and how there needs to be a form of education just around dealing with devices and media and social media and screen time. Like, I envision a future where, for my child, who's now a toddler, I hope I don't have to handle his entire education on how to have a relationship with technology, because our relationship to pornography is, in a way, a subset of our relationship to technology. So education around porn might be a really valuable part of sex education, and so that's a rich thing to share. And I appreciate yours and everyone else's who's been sharing so openly. Like, you're actually helping, I think, promote this kind of conversation by being willing to talk in that way. Mark, do you want to get back to the piece that you were going to speak to?
loved what Ryan had to say. So Ryan, thank you for sharing. I love what I heard from Karl. You know, I feel, you know, from both these men and, you know, kind of ever stronger on this sort of like, hey, it's not for me. It's not something that I want for my son. And being kind of, I'm open-minded, but the more that I find, you know, sort of negative and troubling, and I found even, Dan, when you were kind of talking about eroticism, like that is to me, such a completely different subject, right? Like just, you know, kind of day and night, right? And maybe not day and night, but really, really a separate thing. You know, I mean, you asked about like, you know, good experiences with pornography. Like I don't have, I oftentimes feel like, I don't have, you know, oh, like a fond, good experience with pornography share, other than like, for some reason, my reptilian brain loves seeing naked women, right? And that's something that like, I actually am like, you know, I feel like Karl spoke about it in a very, in some ways that were more scientific than I'm qualified to speak about, but there's, you know, I just believe something that happens mentally by like repetitive images, bright screens, you know, dehumanization, obviously like, you know, built-in, you know, degradation, built-in serotonin bumps, like lots of these fancy things that I know a little bit about from reading about, you know, drugs or pornography or whatever, but like, that's not a way that I want my brain to function or be functioning, not the least reason of which is so that I can absolutely be present with my, you know, whoever my romantic partner may be, whoever, you know, whatever woman I may be with. And like, you know, again, thinking to our children, you know, two things that you said, Daniel. First of all, I obviously I have small child, but also teenagers, virtually impossible to control their relationship with their devices other than through example. And at this point, given that my kids are sort of nearly adult teenagers, like I can't control what they saw in the last 5 years of the way I use my phone. So, you know, my advice to you with a toddler is put your phone away and you'll be well armed to have a good conversation when he's 13, because he's never seen you on a phone, just in terms of the technological side of it. But getting back to the porn piece, you know, my son has a girlfriend, and you know, whatever phase they're at, and when I think back to what phases I was at when I was 16, 17, 18, with my first girlfriend, like, you know, that's a really, you know, the exploration should be there, not the sort of like images of like face fucking and deep throating. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like that's not really where like I would like his brain to be when he's with his girlfriend at 16, and it's not where I want my brain to be. You know, when I'm with, you know, with my partner.
Yeah. So yeah, you're speaking to two things that I've been really pondering deeply. One of them is, you know, when you talked about like, what are my good experiences of porn? Well, you know, I'm sure in the animal moment, I've had, you know, in the past, those sort of indulgent moments. But when I think about like being on my deathbed and reflecting on my entire life, you know, if I'm having a view of my entire life, how am I going to feel about all the time I spent sitting there consuming porn? Like, is that going to feel like, oh, that was a rich use of the blessing of life? And again, I don't want to be sort of like anti entirely porn, but I don't think that there's like, when I reflect on my life, like, oh, my time that I've spent, you know, masturbating to porn has been a real rich experience. But you know, it's kind of like a matter of working with what was available to us, or what has been available to us in a way. And so when I think about my son and what his journey is going to be, and how can I guide him, I actually don't just want to. I mean, I get your feeling, Mark, about wanting just to say, I don't want you to see these images. I don't want you to consume this sort of fake sex in this way. But when I think about like me, you know, hoarding my magazines like Gollum with the Ring and Lord of the Rings when I was, you know, 14 or whatever, like, you know, you'd have one. Yes, Penthouse, by the way, Taylor, is like an amped up version of Playboy. It was a little more, you could actually see women's genitals. If someone had told me, if my dad had tried to say, I don't want you looking at these magazines, I probably would have rebelled against him and said, screw you. And I would have felt ashamed. So like, how can I hope to guide my son in this regard in a sex positive way, but in a way that guides him maybe towards an exploration of erotica, or at least having a consciousness of what he's looking at, and maybe an ability to process it in a different way. But one thing that I've always wondered about in this regard, and this is a perfect transition to our next guest speaker, is what would it be like if there were some kind of sexual content available in, online and video format that wasn't pornography, that wasn't beset with all of these problematic aspects of pornography, that somehow invade sexuality in a more authentic way, in a way that didn't kind of poison the well of our own understanding of sexuality. And why hasn't anyone endeavored to do that? I mean, it's in some way like sort of amateur porn, maybe is a little closer to that. But why hasn't anyone really? Am I just sort of fantasizing about some ideal world where this content exists? And lo and behold, someone drew my attention to our next speaker, whose name is Cindy Gallop. Cindy Gallop, I think, earlier in her career, has been a super successful advertising executive. She's also, I've experienced in watching her TED Talk, a truly compelling public speaker. But most pertinently to this discussion, she is the founder of something called Make Love, Not Porn. And I could describe it for you, but I'd rather hear her do that herself. So Cindy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Why don't you explain your work and your endeavor?
Thank you, Dan, and I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. I should explain that Make Love, Not Porn is an accident. It came out of my direct personal experience. I date younger men. They tend to be men in their 20s. And about 12 or 13 years ago, I began realizing through dating younger men that I was encountering an issue that honestly would never have occurred to me if I hadn't encountered it very intimately and personally. I realized I was experiencing what happens when today's total freedom of access to hardcore porn online meets our society's equally total reluctance to talk openly and honestly about sex. When those two factors converge, porn becomes sex education by default in not a good way. And so I found myself encountering a number of sexual behavioral memes in bed. I went, whoa, I know where that behavior is coming from. I thought, gosh, if I'm experiencing this, other people must be as well. I didn't know that because 12, 13 years ago, nobody was talking about this. Nobody was writing about it. And I, as a naturally action-oriented person, went, I want to do something about this. So 11 years ago, purely as a little side venture, I put up on no money a tiny clunky website at makelovenotporn.com that in its original iteration was just words. The construct was porn world versus real world. Here's what happens in the porn world. Here's what really happens in the real world. I launched at the TED conference in 2009. I became the only TED speaker to say the words, come on my face, on the TED stage, 6 times in succession. The talk went viral as a result, and it drove this extraordinary global response to my tiny website that I had never anticipated. And I realized I'd uncovered a huge global issue. Thousands of people wrote to me from every country in the world, young and old, male and female, straight and gay, pouring their hearts out. And so I felt a responsibility to take Make Love Not Porn forwards in a way that would make it much more far-reaching, helpful, and effective. And so what I did was, I turned Make Love Not Porn into the world's first and only user-generated, human-curated social sex video sharing platform. And the reason I did that was because I should emphasize Make Love Not Porn is not anti-porn because the issue isn't porn. The issue is that we don't talk about sex in the real world. If we did, amongst a host of benefits, people would then be able to bring a real world mindset to the viewing of what is simply performative produced entertainment. And so our tagline in Make Love Not Porn is pro-sex, pro-porn, pro-knowing the difference. Our entire mission is to socialize sex to make it easier for everyone to talk about. And so what we have done is taken every dynamic in social media and applied them to this one area that no other social network or platform will go. We are what Facebook would be if Facebook allowed you to socially, sexually self-express. So basically, anybody from anywhere in the world can submit to us videos of themselves having real world sex. But we're very clear what we mean by this. As Dan said, we're not porn, we're not amateur, we're building this new category on the internet, social sex. And so our videos are not about performing for the camera. They're just about celebrating all of the wonderful, funny, messy, comical, awkward, spontaneous, beautiful, fabulously human ways we all have sex in the real world. At Make Love Not Porn, we curate to make sure of that. I designed Make Love Not Porn around human curation, very important. Our curators watch every single video submitted from beginning to end before we approve it for publication. And here's the reason why. What we're doing is so important and also unique in its ability to change people's sexual attitudes and behavior for the better. Because social sex, as you see from Make Love Not Porn, is very reassuring. We celebrate real world everything. Real world bodies, real world hair, real world penis size, real world breast size. And the reason that's important is because you can talk body positivity all you like, you can preach self-love. Nothing makes you feel great about your own body like seeing people who are no aspirational body types getting turned on by each other, desiring each other, having an amazing time in bed. Our mantra is everybody is beautiful when they're having real world sex, and they really are. Then we're also important because at Make Love Not Porn, we celebrate real world emotion, love, intimacy, feelings. One man wrote to us and our contributors, we call out Make Love Not Porn stars. He said, the sex in that video was incidental. I want what you guys have. I saw the way you looked at each other. I saw the way your eyes met. I hope one day I can meet somebody that I will have that with. We get very moving emails. We're also reassuring because we celebrate the accidents, the awkwardness, the messiness. This is real life. If you can't laugh at yourselves in bed, when can you? In our videos, ridiculous things happen with a sexual equivalent of America's Funniest Home Videos. But the overarching goal of all of this is when I say to people that our mission at Make Love Not Porn is this very simple thing to make it easier for everyone to talk about sex. Because we don't do that currently, people don't get how massively, profoundly transformative that would be. And this is what I mean. I designed Make Love Not Porn around my own beliefs and philosophies, one of which is that everything in life starts with you and your values. So I regularly ask people this question: what are your sexual values? And nobody can ever answer me because we're not taught to think that way. Our parents bring us up to have good manners, a work ethic, sense of responsibility, accountability. Nobody ever brings us up to behave well in bed. But they should, because in bed, values like empathy, sensitivity, generosity, kindness, honesty, respect are as important as those values are in every other area of our lives where we're actively taught to exercise them. And so that's why what we're doing is so important, because if porn is the Hollywood blockbuster movie, Make Love Not Porn is the real world documentary. The only way you educate people as to what is great consensual communicative sex, good sexual values and good sexual behavior is by watching people actually having that kind of sex. And Make Love Not Porn is the only place on the internet where you can do that. And I can tell you that, you know, watching our videos, the sex we all have in the real world is more amazing, more surprising, more innovative, more creative, more hot and arousing than porn will ever be. And that is why we call ourselves the social sex revolution. The revolutionary part is not the sex, it's the social.
That's great. I love that. Cindy, thank you so much for sharing that very detailed picture of what you're doing. I think it's truly inspired. You know, we're all just sort of, the process of individual and collective evolution, just like real world sex, is kind of a messy affair, you can say, right? We just, and a lot of it comes from trying to tune into what's authentic. And a lot of what you spoke to is about that, about the people not only sharing what's authentic with others, but finding it between themselves. And there's a real healing aspect of that. And so I do see that you're, you know, I don't know whether or not Make Love Not Porn is the answer, but it's one of the answers, I think. And it's a very promising and a very unique endeavor. And I'd have to tell you, when my son gets to the age where he's going to be seeing things, sexual content on the internet. I hope it's make love, not porn, and I hope it's make love, not porn, not porn. So that would be wonderful to me. And I do think that it's worth noting, because we sort of glossed over it a little bit. And I did say I wasn't going to share my whole titillating history with pornography, but I think this piece is worth sharing, because as Mark said, compared to someone like Taylor, who's very young, compared to us old guys, when internet porn actually became ubiquitous and universally accessible, I was in my early 30s, right? I'd had, on some level, I'd had a certain opportunity to learn about sex and about intimacy and healthy relationships. And I'd had healthy sex and intimacy and relationships. But it's not because I had entirely escaped the bad programming. It's just that there wasn't such an onslaught that kids are having nowadays. It's like, back then, because our stage of cultural evolution was really keeping porn kind of in the underworld, you had to seek it out. It wasn't universally accessible. And it was like, now someone has just opened the valve or pulled the plug out of the dam, and it's all there all the time. And so that's a different thing, but it is also consequently a little more socially acceptable. It's sort of what I was saying about marijuana. And that's a progress in and of itself. I'll share this beat. In between my 30s, when I was having access and therefore an exploration of online porn, and my very first experiences with hoarding the little magazine and using the same magazine for like 6 months, by the way. Like, kids you kids nowadays are spoiled. Taylor, you and your YouPorn generation, go on there and there's 5,000 different things you can see. Well, back in my day, if you had one Penthouse magazine, man, there's probably certain copies of Penthouse that I used hundreds of times, so we had to walk to school and we didn't have running water. And so, you know what I'm saying? But there was a kind of interim period. And I discovered, in terms of hardcore porn, the only way you could get to that when I was in my late teens and early 20s, you had to go to some pretty nasty places. I'll say, for example, Times Square in New York City. If anyone has been to Times Square recently, it's a very sanitized, tourist trappy, beautiful place to see a Broadway play. But when I was in my, late teens and early 20s and feeling very experimental, it was a nasty, nasty place. There were a lot of drugs. There were a lot of prostitutes. And there were these things called peep shows, where you would literally walk underground down a set of greasy stairs into these places. And for some of them, it was like you'd find yourself in a booth with a little crappy video screen and feeding money into a machine to watch hardcore porn. And there were 4 greasy buttons, and you could do whatever business you wanted to do in there while watching this pornography. And in some cases, and I'll say this is sort of maybe a low point, and maybe not the kind of story generally people reveal when they're talking and being broadcast on YouTube, but I think it's worth saying one of these places I went to once or twice during that experimental time was a place where you'd go in and feed money into a slot, and a window would go up, and there was like a little stage with 2 or 3 women naked, and a woman would come over, and the stage was sort of elevated, so they'd come over and sort of bend down, and you could pay them a couple bucks, and maybe if they liked you, you could touch their breasts. But it was a very weird, objectifying, surreal kind of experience, and that was still a formative period for me, and something felt so wrong about it, and yet because of that, it was like something irresistible. I mean, I went there, I think, twice. So I did go back once, and this was a really, really seedy environment. You'd go down into this place and it was dark and there were sort of shady characters around. So I think in a way, bringing pornography out of the dungeon, at least, into the mainstream, even though it's causing all of these new sociological problems and challenges, is still an advancement. It's stripping away of one layer of shame. And I had some shame around having had those experiences. Now, I don't now, I can talk about it publicly, I don't plan to run for office anytime soon. And hopefully if I did, at that point, it'll be socially acceptable to have had such experiences. But, and I wanted to just share openly about that stuff in terms of like encouraging shamelessness in this sort of conversation. But I do see now what Cindy's doing maybe as a new layer of bringing sexual content in a way that is stripped of artifice, stripped of darkness, and in a much more beautiful celebratory way. So Cindy, I'm wishing you luck with that endeavor. Does anyone else, want to sort of, has anything else come up for anyone else? It's also interesting to me, by the way, that in the promotion of this episode, we made an effort to emphasize the invitation to women, and yet it's mostly men that have responded. I thought it would be very interesting for women to be able to say, hey, I don't like it when my boyfriend does porn, but it's even hard for women, I think, to express those things. So it's telling. But I do appreciate so dearly what's been shared so far. Christina, it looks like you had something to say.
Yeah, I was going to share from Cindy's share. In the transformational work, which I tend to geek out in and Deepen's all about, is that I've been seeing this, push towards full self-expression. And, it reminded me of Burning Man. There is the Dr. Bronner's foam dome. And I had the opportunity once to actually work the foam dome, where I got to be the person who up on top of it and was cleaning and spraying people down. And to know what the foam dome is, it's this big, I guess it's this huge outdoor shower that 40 people will jump into together and get sprayed down first with foam, Dr. Bronner's foam, and they'll then get cleaned with water, and then they come out the other end, and you just watch them kind of go through this like conveyor belt together. And people stand in, you'll see 300 people standing in a long line out in the desert to get a shower, and they have to get naked. So they all go through, and you see them as they come in, and they're all like this, a little bit uncomfortable. And then they go through it, and at the other end, they are just like cheering. And I looked around, and I remember looking around and looking at all the bodies, and I had just never seen so many unique forms of bodies in one place. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're all beautiful, like all different sizes, all different boob types, and just all different butts, all different ages. And it was so cool to see that. And then also there's another program, Honesty Lab, and Honesty Lab does a self-development 5-day course where everyone goes and lives in a house together. And on like day 3, they all have to get naked and circle areas of their body that they, didn't like, but you start to see, because we haven't had environments to just, again, see real bodies. That's why you have a whole generation of women who we did run out and got breast augmentations, because that's what we were taught was what was beautiful and looked good. And we still constantly struggle with that, but to have 10 grand so you can go out and, make your body this way to feel confident when a man sticks his hand up your shirt at, in your young 20s and throughout your life is a challenging, it's a challenging thing. And I think it's all wrapped together. So I'm excited, and so it doesn't have to be necessarily just this, like, go out and watch people have sex, but it's like watching people love their body and accept their body, and seeing all different shapes and bodies in their naked form has been super helpful and healing for me. And I know for many, many, many other people. And I think that, and also even being in spaces where we can talk about sex. My father is in the other room tonight, and he usually actually comes to all the Deepen experiences with me. And I said, well, tonight's, he's like, I'm not doing that with my daughter. I'm not going, and I'm 39 years old. And he's like, I'm not going into a space where I'm talking about that. And the only thing my dad did say to me when I was growing up in 16, I had sex for the first time, and my mom, I don't know if any of them are listening, but my mom asked me, and I lied to her at first. I said, no, I haven't. And then I sat there and I felt bad that I just lied. And so then I confessed and I said, all right, I did, but don't tell dad. A week later, my dad says, hey, I have something to talk to you about. So for 3 days straight, I kept running into him and he said, we have to talk, we have to talk. And I kept running the other way. And then one day he sits me down at the kitchen table before I'm going to run out to my boyfriend's place and says, you're not to have sex. Like, you're too young to have sex. You're not to have sex. Promise me. And so I promised my dad that this is the extent of the conversation. I promised him that I wouldn't have sex. I was too young. I went back to the boyfriend. I said, we can't have sex anymore. So we didn't for 2 weeks.
Good commitment.
Well done.
Yes.
It's funny that you shared that anecdote from Burning Man. The one time I went to Burning Man in 2005, I think I was in a prototype for that thing where it was just one shower, and someone invited me, sensing that I hadn't had a shower in several days. I wanted to take a shower, and I ended up having to take a shower in front of a gallery of onlookers. It was just 20 people sitting in a semicircle watching people take a shower, but it was kind of liberating. So I guess we're getting close to the end here. I wanted to just invite anybody who hasn't shared or spoken, there's no pressure, but if you feel inclined or you've been sitting on something, now kind of is the time. Alternatively, or in addition to that, if Karl or Cindy wants to have any last words, I'm sure we could go on with this topic for days, and whoever showed up did.
I'd just like to say one thing, which is, in 11 years of working on Make Love Not Porn, I've so many people write to me every day, their comments on our videos and so on. And I want to just say that half the problem with sex is the guilt, the shame, and the embarrassment that society has imbued this perfectly natural, wonderful, universal human experience with. And that is such a shame because, to your point, Christina, about, the wonderfulness when we can just be ourselves naked. I mean, we hear all the time, Make Love Not Porn, people tell us, you made me feel so much better about my own body. I mean, couples write and say, you saved our marriage, you saved our relationship, you've made us be more open with each other. The word we hear all the time is guilt-free. It's so important to strip all of that away from something that is so wonderful and natural and fabulous, and that we would all be enjoying a whole lot more if we didn't feel this ridiculous societal shame and embarrassment. And so, this gathering is wonderful. This conversation is wonderful. I hope it expands, it continues, because the more we talk about all of this, the more we bring it out in the sunlight, the happier everybody will be. I always say, Make Love Not Porn operates in the single biggest market of them all. Not sex, not porn, the market of human happiness.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. I love that. I agree that shame and hiding is one of the biggest challenges we deal with just as humans around sex. And I just invite everyone here to just explore everything, explore porn a little bit. Explore, I love the platform you have with so much vulnerability. Explore erotica, explore just your felt sense, and just know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and for how long are you doing it. The second we get trapped into habits of porn so many times a week, this is when we start getting programmed as only one way. But if we can lift ourselves to a higher consciousness where we can enjoy the flavors, but know what's for us and what isn't, and continue to challenge our senses with different varieties, I think, we can continue to learn about who we are as sexual beings and become whatever we truly choose to be.
Amen. Yeah, my last word on that is that, in support of that, is, for me, I think this is part of why I've consciously sworn off porn at some point, was there's just I think ultimately we all have a deep sense of knowing somewhere in there. And you get to a point, that doesn't mean everybody gets to the same place. And we have different people. Mark has shared a completely different position than Karl has, than Ryan has, than Cindy has. We're all in our own places with this, but every one of us has access to a deep sense of knowing where you feel what is authentic and what is right and what is healthy and what isn't. And the more we can tune into that, the more we kind of accelerate and facilitate our own ability to govern our own self-evolution in that healthy way. So I really am grateful to all of you for participating in this.
Can I say something, Dan? First of all, thank you. It's been really interesting and intriguing, and I wish we could hear more from more time to listen to more views. The question that I of course, I come from way back in the flickery 8mm, reels on a sheet in the frat house. But I feel uncomfortable with blaming shame on society, because society is really people. It's a oversimplification and a damaging one. And our powerlessness in the face of some things that we know are harmful. For example, you can talk about TikTok with 6-year-olds trying to be sexual. You know that their childhoods are being stolen, and you know that we, again, as this so-called society, are powerless to stop it. And so what I'm saying about this whole conversation is the context needs to be widened. And you can't do that in a few words, but there are questions about what's going on. What's really going on here? And it's bigger than just a few people trying to know themselves better. There are forces here of an immense power. We're often terribly powerless in front of them. And a lot of your explanations are very good in that respect of opening things up. But it's like the screen has to be made 4 times as large if you really want to deal with this subject. Anyway, thanks for my 2 minutes.
Maybe we're going to have another session on it, Walter, and you'll in the beginning of it and start us off. Christina, you want to bring us home?
Sure, yeah, and good time to bring us home, because Walter, I think you just left us at a to be continued. No doubt. Thank you, Dan. It was such a great topic, a great second episode. Thank you, Karl and Cindy, for being here with us and joining us. And everyone who tuned in, and we'll have this link on this experience on YouTube, and we'll share it afterwards. So if you want to pass it around and bring and invite more people into Omega Male, the next episode or the next gathering. It's so interesting with these terminology, gathering, episode. What is it? Is when it's both. It's an interactive podcast. It's all the things in this new world. So the next Omega Male is December 9th. Do we have a topic for that one yet? Or we're still in the question mark, right?
Sort of toying with this idea of 2 discomfort zones for men: the expression of affection for one another and being in conflict with one another. These are areas where I think men are severely challenged how to handle them. So that might be it.
Cool. Awesome. So that's Wednesday, December 9th. Mark that on your calendar now and join us again. You all, when you registered, if you've been to a WeDeepen experience before in the past, you may have noticed that we are transitioning out of mind body. Yay. And we're now on an easier, more simpler platform, Eventbrite, which is making, so it's good to see. It seems like everyone got here seamless today. Wonderful. WeDeepen pre-virus, we were in-person experiences in Los Angeles with plans to roll out to 46 cities over the next 5 years with in-person experiences. And COVID gave us this opportunity to reach more people and bring more people together. And now we're embracing the online world. WeDeepen is now a growing network of interactive online experiences and entertainment for people who want healthy relationships. So if you're here, if you're present in this space, it's because you want healthy relationships. We did ask everyone to turn their name tags to include their Instagram. So please take a note if you want to capture any of those and connect on Instagram. You're more than welcome to. We like to encourage connection afterwards, and also encourage you to keep coming back. Bonds build best over time when we build familiarity with each other. So we have lots of interesting programs for you to check out. And again, more of them will continue to roll out as well. Next Wednesday is the Great Love Debate, November 18th. The Great Love Debate is an interactive dating-like show. We're gonna have 3 reality TV stars with us. The winner of The Bachelor, who then became The Bachelorette, Jen Sharkskip, I believe is her name. And Thank you. Awesome, Kelly. And we also have Tyson, who is on ABC's The Proposal, and Aaron Davis, who is known as Bubby's Knows Best. So they're joining in next week's Great Love Debate. Check out more experiences there. You can see Nightcap Ninja every Sunday, can help you sleep better. Nadine will ease you into sleep. And more upgrades and improvements continue to come. So stay with us. We deepen together. Again, this will be on YouTube tomorrow. We threw a link in Topia. I'm going to step over into Topia and then hang out for a good, 15, 20 minutes if anyone wants to jump in this link. It's a Sims-like world where you get a little avatar and you'll walk around and we can connect, have one-on-one conversations, or dive in deeper as a group. Thank you all for coming out. We're going to send us out with some music. Feedback is always welcome. I will acknowledge that. So please, if there's any way that we can improve our experience for you, please send us the message and we will take that into consideration.
Thank you so much, really.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Great work, Dan. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you.